This presentation is really more like 25 or 30 minutes, and then we can just talk about your projects. And really, it's such a small group. Just, don't even raise your hand. Just ask a question if you have one along the way. But this is basically an intro to Lingotek, a discussion, sort of a high-level review of what the big challenges are that we help address in managing multilingual content. And then I'm not a developer, so I'm director of sales, so it'll be a very high-level tour of the module itself and some of the key interfaces in the SaaS platform that the module connects to. And we'll look at a few different workflows that are fairly typical that folks use. Generally, there's a blend of workflows that are used to manage multilingual content. A couple of case studies, and there's no reason to wait to the end to ask questions. Just blurt them out as you have them. So just a little bit about Lingotek. We've been around for about 8 years now. We're based out in Salt Lake, although I'm in New York. Our focus is a cloud-based translation management system that basically is two things. You can think of it as a workflow automation platform that makes managing content easier and it automates a lot of the processes. And then it's also a workbench that translation can be done on. There's some sort of industry standard tool sets that translators use, things like translation memories and glossaries and style guides and things like that are a part of that platform. We do integrations into a number of different content repositories, Drupal being one of them. It's the most widely distributed Drupal contrib module, over 200 sites reporting at this point. We're baked into some well-known distros, Acquia Commons being one of those. We're actually a member of their digital alliance, a founding member, one of 7. We also do professional translation. So for a lot of our clients that are having us do the software, they like to round-trip content. There's a very tidy way to send it up to our professional people to translate it and reinsert it back into their Drupal site. So a way to think of us is the cloud-based system in the center there. The integration in the upper left into Drupal by our contrib module, which is called Lingotek Translation, and then professional services, professional translation people down there at the bottom. I mentioned that we integrate into other platforms as well. Some of our larger clients, I don't know if this is true with your projects, sometimes they have more than just a public-facing website on Drupal. They might have an internal intranet or something like that that's running on SharePoint or something like that. So there's this notion of a translations hub, which basically means all of your translated content can live in the cloud and then it can propagate out to Drupal and anywhere else that it needs to be, internal tools, custom tools. That's a way to basically save money by leveraging all of your translations across all of the different platforms that you might happen to utilize. Let's not even go there. Some of our clients. Anyway, this is basically the problem that we solve. Websites these days are extremely dynamic. Content changes constantly. 10 years ago, it was easy enough to basically manage translations offline, to copy and paste the new content into Word docs, email them off to an agency or whatever, or to a private translator, somebody, have them translate them, get them back, reinsert them into the website, because there just wasn't that much volume. But these days, there's so much change that if you don't use technology to sort of stay on top of it and eliminate mistakes, it's really easy to get bogged down. And so just sort of a quick review of what that process in the past has looked like. And I won't read through all these boxes, but basically each of these boxes is a step in the translation process, in the content translation process. It's, not all of these apply in every case, but typically it's essentially identifying content that needs to be translated, extracting it from the site somehow, packaging it up, sending it out to whoever's going to translate it, not having any visibility into what they're doing or when they're going to be done, getting it back, having to take it through some sort of a QC process internally, in-context review, and then pushing it out live. The only part of any of that that a translation agency helps you with is this one box, right? If you send them stuff, they will translate it, and they will send it back to you. But if you think about what it takes to keep content translated on a website, you start to realize that it's actually a lot of manual sort of web admin steps. And what Lingotek does is provides a system that automates all of those. It doesn't give up, doesn't take control away, doesn't take control away from people to be able to review, but all of these sort of godforsaken steps that are just mundane, repetitive steps are automated. It makes the process faster, more agile, it prevents mistakes from happening, like breaking markup and stuff like that. So think about that, all these boxes, that's just one language. What if you're doing more than one language? How much content do you have? How many words are on each page? How many people are involved in the process? Are there multiple time zones? This is basically the conundrum that we fix. What happens is organizations just get overwhelmed with the number of cycles required to stay on top. And then content gets out of sync, and pretty soon the whole strategy of having a multilingual website is abandoned. They just stand up a small little macro site in the other language so they don't have as much content that they have to worry about. The reason for that is that it's just too manual a process. There's not enough automation, right? So here's the big payoff slide. Lingotek's system takes all of that crap and automates it, makes it possible to have all of it happen automatically. When new content is introduced, the system sees that, it immediately sends it up to the cloud. Your pre-configured workflow for it, whether it's to be machine translated and then reviewed by an internal Spanish speaker, say, and fixed, as we talked about, or if it has to be professionally translated, that's what happens to it. Whatever needs to happen to it happens, and then it comes right back down into Drupal. So this is a good way to sort of think about that schematically. You've got your website at the top, running Drupal, new content, change content, automatically goes up to the cloud, and then the three icons there can be automatically translated. It can be translated by internal people who speak the target language, contractors you have. It's a browser-based tool, so you can set up whatever type of workflow makes sense, or you can have it professionally translated, either by Lingotek or by some agency that you like to work with, by a private contractor, whatever. And then it comes right back down and gets reinserted into Drupal. A lot of our clients like to use Workbench for their editorial workflow application. So our module cross-integrates very well with that. So what you can do is you can create a step where it's, typically content comes in and it's draft content, sort of needs review. Then it's approved content. Then you can put a step that says send for translation. Goes up to Lingotek, gets translated, and then the next step, back from translation, and then you can have an in-context review by somebody that speaks the language. They can look at it like a web page, then publish it. So that's a great way to basically manage. Yeah.
So with this system, all you really ever have to worry about is the English content.
Yes, or whatever the source language is. You establish that, and yeah. So all you really need to focus on is that, and then of course, you want to keep your workflows configured the way you want them. You want to be taking advantage of whatever resources you have that can help you keep cost as low as possible and quality up. And you want to review the translations that come back. That's always going to be something that people need to do. I have people say to me, they say, well, sure, it's been translated into Arabic, but I don't read Arabic, so how am I supposed to proof it? So you need to have human resources for that sort of stuff, and if you need a professional review, because nobody at your disposal speaks the target language, then you create that step. And we'll get into this a little more later, but when you build these workflows, you literally sort of drag and drop boxes to make these workflows. And you can assign people to different steps in the process. You can assign internal people or an external agency or something. So if the process was, it gets translated by somebody, but then we have nobody to review it because they don't speak the language, what can happen is when it's finished, an email can go out to whoever's going to review it that you've hired. They click a link, it spins up the web-based platform, they look at it, they proof it, they fix it, they click save, and it comes back around in the process. I touched on this a little bit already, but typically a blend of translation workflows is what's appropriate. Automatic machine translation has its place. Typically it's used to translate social comments, article comments, those sorts of things where it's a given that the enterprise is not responsible for the quality of the content. Like if you go to the New York Times website and you read comments under the articles, you can tell usually when the person when the comment was not written in English, because the syntax is just kind of clunky and strange, and then I look and I go, oh, wow, that guy's from Indonesia. But it's still interesting because you can immediately have everything translate into the target language, all comments, and there's value to that. Another great example of that is like product user forums and things like that. Some guy has a question about his iPhone, how do I make the font bigger? Some guy can answer immediately. The question gets translated into all the target languages instantly, and anyone can answer in any language that they speak, and it gets translated back into all the languages. So you can ask a question in English, and some guy can answer it in Farsi. You don't really care who it was. You just care about getting the answer. So that's a use for machine translation. Another is more and more as the quality of machine translation improves, a lot of people do a workflow where when new content gets introduced or content gets changed, it goes up to the system, it gets machine translated, and then it pings a professional reviewer. And it's quicker for the professional to review content and edit it than it is to completely look at it in one language and translate it. And to the extent you pay those guys by the hour, they can move through a lot more stuff if you put machine translation in front of them and say, okay, fix this. And they find the things that are screwed up and they fix them. Yeah, those sorts of things. And there's some funny examples. I sort of accumulate them over time, but there are certain things that, if you translate from one language into another, not only is it incorrect, but it's just massively offensive. And so they catch those things, and it's really useful. Community translation is kind of a catch-all we use for human translation, but not by professionals. So that would be the people internally that you have that speak the language. We talked about this, the Spanish speakers that can review machine translations and fix them. And then professional, there's always going to be a place for that. There's always going to be really important, highly nuanced content that you need professionals to do, to make sure it's not just translated but localized. It's kind of a whole other discussion, but they're not only translating it correctly, they're looking to leverage local dialectic colloquialisms and other sorts of things to really make it as compelling as possible. So getting back to our annoying little boxes here, what are we doing? If blue means automated and red means manual, and blue was the only thing that was blue before was the agency doing the work, well, now by virtue of the module, we're automating all these other little steps and all of the web admin steps. And we're basically creating a shiny new world to live in where translation happens seamlessly and easily, and it's not a problem to manage regardless of how many languages you deploy, how much change that you have. You've got a system in place that manages it all. So that's the high level. Now I'm just going to quickly run through a tour of a couple of processes, enough to sort of make you guys dangerous enough to be able to install the module and play with it and stuff like that. So just a couple of different things. One thing that you can do that I highly recommend is just download the module into a dev environment and just play with it. Like I said, you can machine translate into any commercial language for free. You can pick which translation engine you want to use, Bing, Google, whatever. If you just want to see how stuff renders, like if you want to see what Arabic would look like with everything right justified in your design, slap the module in there and translate it into Arabic and just check it out. You might find, another kind of funny thing is that German has these unbelievably long, complex nouns. Right, so all of a sudden menus are all broken and stuff, So you can identify stuff when you're working your way through. So I'm just going to walk you through the steps of just installing the module and translating, machine translating the site. So obviously, go to Drupal.org, go to our website, whatever, download the latest version. When you've done that, obviously you need to enable it. There are some dependencies. It's designed to sit on top, for example, of the I-18N internationalization suite and some other, I think there are 9 or 10 other modules, but it'll tell you the ones that it needs to function properly, so you'll want to add those as well. Save down the configuration. Then you want to provision a SaaS instance, which you can do for free. There's a free tier specifically for this purpose. So you do that. So now your Drupal module is connected to the SaaS instance up in the cloud. You designate a source language. You indicate how you want, whether you want there to be a language switcher on the page, or whether you want to, there are a few different ways to do it. You can have the module just detect the preferred language in the browser and display that, or you can have a switcher, and if you do a switcher, where do you want to put it, that kind of thing. Do you want to translate comments is another thing. We mentioned this before. You can decide whether you do or whether you don't. If there are comment sections on the website, simple enough to do that. And then, other types of content translate too. It's not just the content, it's all the menus and taxonomies and blocks and all of that. That will all translate as well if you check the boxes to make that happen. Once you've done that, you just pick the languages that you want to add. In this case, we picked Spanish. It was on Arabic, but you can add as many as you want. You could have 30 of these going down the thing. Then you upload the content up to Lingotek, and it happens virtually instantaneously. It gets translated. Once you've done that, it's a very fast engine. And then you download the translations, and you'll be able to see,
So this is going to put out a call as soon as it's submitted. It's not going to wait until Cron runs and then send.
That's right.
Oh,
that's right. It's going to just send it right up. You can pause before you download it, and you can pause before you upload it. But the default is it'll go up and get translated. Then when you look on this screen, you have sort of a dashboard, and the blue bar there is the progress bar. With machine translation, unless it's a gigantic amount of content, and, it turns it around in 15, 20 seconds at the most. The progress bars are much more important when there are people doing the translations, because then you can see, how far along they are. It could be a period of weeks while a project's getting finished. But in the case of Spanish, it's done instantly. Back in Drupal, on this screen, you can see that it's completely finished. You basically click the sync button, and then it's there for you. And as you can see, we can toggle between the Spanish and the English. So it's really that simple, and it doesn't cost anything to do this. So as you're working on sites and you're trying to figure out a design that will work in the target language as well, we highly recommend taking this step. In fact, there's some documentation that I can send you if we follow up together that is specific about design considerations for multilingual stuff, considerations to make. There's a document called, it's got a very ambiguous title. It doesn't seem, I think it's called the Admin Resource Guide. But it's really about that. It should be called something like Design Considerations for Multilingual Content. I don't know why it's not.
I noticed the basic demo site, that did not get translated.
Interesting, yeah. I'm not sure why that would be. This is a spun-up free-tier Acquia site.
That might be the slogan.
Could be.
The site's slogan.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that you do is you build out a glossary so that things that shouldn't get translated don't. There's a really funny word, I forget what it is, that Lingotek translates into in Spanish. And it's not funny like it's some, it's just, I don't even know what it means. But so that's an example of if you don't do that, it'll translate everything. Anyway, so we talked a little bit about your project, which is likely to involve internal translators. First a passive machine translating and then internal translators. This particular example workflow doesn't have the machine translation step, but it would be easy enough to insert it. But we'll show what it would be like to create an article, switch the workflow out so that it gets translated by internal people, and then how the TMS workbench can be used to do the translation. So obviously creating a node, simple enough. This screen is where there are a lot of settings like uploading changed content immediately or not, downloading translated content immediately or not, whether or not you're going to translate the aliases and stuff. For our purposes, all the way down there at the bottom, we're going to change the workflow from machine translate to internal translation. What that results in is any content that needs to be translated gets sent up to the TMS. This is a screen within the translation management system that an administrator would see. They can see all of the nodes that need to be translated, and they can see the status. Most of them are 100%. The one, Spanish, is 0% because it just arrived up there. What they can then do is assign that to somebody for translation. So there are a bunch of different mechanisms that can be used for that, including how, type of translator, if it's a specific translator, whether it's one of the specific credentials, a lot of different stuff. They can translate it themselves on this screen if they want, and the highlighted part would be the delta. Another interesting and important point with translation memories is that anything that's been translated before will be brought out, will be automatically presented as a translation match. The highlighted part is the part that needs to be translated. But if they sent it out to somebody, it would just basically be an email like this that would go to either a team or an individual that would say, hey, there's stuff for you to translate. And the person could click on the login button, spin up an instance of the SaaS platform, do the translation just like this, save it. And you can see now in the administrative view that the Spanish is at 100%, and it goes right back down to Drupal, and is available to be published, along whatever workflow process you've got built out. So whether it gets published immediately or it gets an in-context review, that depends on how Drupal is configured to manage the workflow. But as you can see here, Spanish content, English content, very, very, very simple process. So one other workflow I just want to quickly show you. Professional translation, as I said, there's always going to be stuff that you're going to want pros to do to make sure it's absolutely perfect. So again, we get into this screen where we've got an article. We change the translation profile to professional. So you can see there are all the different languages here. You can see the status. I talked about this a little bit before. This is where, if you had stuff sent out for Portuguese and Arabic and Spanish and French and Russian, it might take a week or two, depending upon the size of the project. This is where you'd always be able to go and see what percentage had been completed. And when each language is completed, you can also see this in Drupal, but then you can download it. Here's an example where stuff's about 2/3 of the way done. Within Drupal, you have this screen, which is sort of a status screen. Blue means that everything's in sync, everything's cool, everything's perfect. Red means that stuff is out of sync and needs to be sent for translation. So what you can do is select that and immediately send it up for professional translation. Most folks don't like it to automatically go up because there's a cost associated with professional translation. So they like to have a little more control than just that, if some intern goes in and uploads a press release, there's a bill that's going to come in the mail. They want to have some control. So they send it up manually for translation. When it's green, that means that there's translated content ready to download. What you want is for everything to be blue. That means it's all in sync. So when the pros are finished with it, they'll see green there. They'll know I've got professional translation to download. They can click the sync button. Everything will turn blue. That means everything out on the site is published. There's your English. There's your Chinese. There is your, you can hardly read that, French and Spanish. I mentioned hybrids, and this is the last sort of thing about workflows. I don't want to make your eyes bleed. It's late in the day. But as I mentioned before, you can literally, by dragging boxes around, you can build out whatever workflows make sense for you based on the resources you have available. So here's some other examples. You can have stuff professionally translated and then have your own people in country review it, make sure it's fully localized. You can machine translate and then do internal reviewers, which is the project we were talking about earlier. You can machine translate and then have professional reviewers if you don't have people that speak the target language. You can even crowdsource. Like Wikipedia puts that link at the top that says this article needs citation. You can, there's a setting you can do so that when an article's in English there can be a little box at the top that says this article needs to be translated. Click here to help with the translation, and any website user can translate, and then it arrives at a place where it has to be proofed, obviously. But you can literally just take advantage of people that come surfing in off the web that happen to speak the target language. So you can use crowdsourcing if you want. For some of our big clients like Intel and stuff, they have a whole corporate monolith that translates, has agency relationships and stuff. But what they do is they stage it, and then they have internal people in all of the countries around the world look at the translations and localize them. They're like, there's a difference between the Arabic they speak in Dubai and the Arabic they speak in Egypt, and there are ways to tweak it to make it that much more perfect. So my point being, there's a lot of flexibility in terms of what you do to manage the different translation workflows. Just a quick case study. One of our clients, Alfresco, you guys familiar with them? Big hosting and services company. They've got a huge number of customers, and they're all deployed all over the world. And they basically use our system to do what we've been talking about. And so far, I think they're in 12 languages. They're going up to like 35 different languages. But it's very simple for them. They're a great reference customer of ours. There's a reference quote there that you can take a look at. There's some other stuff on our website if you want to look at case studies. There are a lot of videos that show how to do different things. Some stuff like this, other stuff related to module installation, configuration, and so on. So I would encourage you to go there, read the case studies, read the installation documentation, download the admin resource guide, and then install the module and play with it. And if you want to get in touch with me, I can connect you with one of my solutions engineers who'd be happy to spend an hour with you in a WebEx or a GoToMeeting, just basically standing over your shoulder and explaining how to do the things that you asked how to do. But get familiar with the module because it doesn't cost anything, and you can use it to do sort of, we call it pseudo translation, but to just sort of simulate what the site's going to look like in the other languages, just for the purposes of tweaking the design and so on and so forth. Once you do that, it sort of demystifies the whole thing, and you basically all that's left is to decide how you want stuff translated to the extent people are going to do some of it. Figure out what resources you have internally. If you need pros, figure out what that's going to cost. We talked a little bit about figuring out how much change you're going to have, that sort of stuff. You start to see a pathway to having a multilingual website, not just deployed initially, but one that can be managed in a fairly easy way. So, every day I have conversations with folks that are somewhere along that path, and would love to continue to talk to you guys about your projects. So that's basically the deck. We can talk about individual projects. We can talk about the system. We can go have beers. We can do whatever we want. So, did that make sense? I felt like at times you seemed a little. At times it seemed like you weren't sure what you were seeing. What can I clarify? Were you just in agony because I was just blathering on incessantly, or?
I'm so new to all of this and mostly I keep thinking of this could be so much better than the way that my content managers do things now, which is not great.
Yeah, well, I mean that's the business we're in. It's basically process improvement, right? So, that's not unusual. You're not alone. We have a lot of software companies for clients because they tend to be sort of early adopters of trying new things.
Back and forth, and managing your volunteers in an Excel doc in a Google spreadsheet is probably not the best thing.
It's really not, but I'll tell you what, it's about the most common thing that folks are doing that haven't figured out a way to do some sort of a technology-driven process. That's just sort of what everybody does. They get it all in spreadsheets. They have shared Google Docs, and that's a very typical situation here.
Well, and we just lost the person who was our volunteer translator coordinator yesterday.
Oh, really?
So,
that's no good.
She's in this. She's only there for a year anyway. But I hope her boss knows everything else. Whereas if you have something like this, it's there.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's, once it's in place, once you've got, the people set up, the people assigned various responsibilities in the workflow, nobody has, this overwhelming task to manage. For the site admin, it's just like, oh yeah, that needs to go get translated, so that's where it is. And then, oh, that's back from translation, so that just needs to be published. Translators aren't worried about the website and all that stuff. They just know that when they get pinged with a little email that there's some content for them to translate, so they do that in 10 minutes and they're done. And no single person is kind of overwhelmed with this Franken-site that they have to, copy and paste down from and up to. And everybody has their little tasks, and it just hums along. It's great.
Does it support glossaries?
Yes.
Yeah, we've got like a 600-term English managed fiction
Mm-hmm.
glossary because, you know, we're dealing with legal content.
Yeah, it's important.
There's a word in a legal context may mean something completely different
Mm-hmm.
than in any other context.
Yeah, totally true. Absolutely. Translate.
Huh.
Even in English.
And we try to, and, you know, we try to start with plain language to begin with, but
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's almost like legalese is almost like its own language.
It is.
You know? So it's like you translate from English to legal.
So I'm sure I'll see it and it'll be kind of obvious, but could you just, you know, when you showed the node creation page,
Mm-hmm.
let's say you've already got an existing node and you go back and can you see, were there tabs for the different languages so you can see what the corresponding language version is of
Yes.
at the node level?
Yeah. In fact, I had a conversation just yesterday about that. I think that it's a little confusing in this DAC, the fact that we treat node creation as like a required part of the process, and it's really not. You're assigning nodes or entities to different workflows. You don't have to create one each time, and you can see the other languages that are there.
I'm just thinking of the eventual client that that will say, oh, yeah, we set it all up. It's all basic, probably mostly machine done, but down 3 months down the road, you want to be able to say, oh, some native speaker said, well, you might want to change that wording a little bit on that one page. And you can tell, oh, just go edit the node, go in here and just change you don't have to go through that whole translating process.
Absolutely.
You can just go in there and edit the specific word or words and save it, and you're done.
Yeah, and when a node or a page or an entity gets sent up for translation, that dashboard there will, if it's basically a huge bunch of paragraphs of copy and there's only 3 sentences that have changed, it will populate the match that it finds, the translation memory that it finds, and it'll highlight that part that's different. And so the translator will see, like, well, that's the only thing that's changed is that bottom little paragraph. Maybe it's a press release, and at the bottom of them they do the little sort of about the companies thing. Maybe the marketers changed the about the companies thing, so now all these press releases that are up there.
So remember the edits from before.
Yeah. I should have mentioned that. Jeez, everything gets recorded that's ever translated on the system, and whenever content in the future is sent up for translation, the system compares that content to what's in the vault, translation memory vault, and it'll do fuzzy matching and stuff, and you can look at the closest ones. And like I said, when it populates those, it will show you, look, this was translated before. What you've sent up for translation is like an 88% overlap. And there's just this one little part that's different.
So if, for example, my English content manager creates a piece of content, it gets sent up to translation, my Spanish content manager goes in and fixes it to match the way he thinks it should be written.
Mm-hmm.
And then 6 months later, she goes in, the English content manager goes back into the English piece of content, makes some minor revisions, and then sends it back up. It will remember what he did the first time around.
Yeah, and there's a way to toggle. There's a revision history, so there's a way to toggle between each. It won't just remember
I think like in our instance, the edit process has been more problematic than the initial creation process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can understand that, absolutely. But the system will account for that. It will show you multiple prior versions, and generally the most recent one is the correct one. Not always, but